Talking in class. Oh, now that's loud. Okay. Welcome to the Newmarket Community Power Public Forum, hosted by the Newmarket Environment and Energy Environment Advisory Committee. We will be presenting some of our thoughts on a electric aggregation plan. I would like to start with Sarah, who will do an introduction.
Thanks for coming. I know your time's really precious. I'll just quickly, yes, my name is Sarah Stinson. I'm a member of this committee, a new member of this committee, and I'm a nervous public speaker, but I am happy that I got the task of making introductions. Thanks, Ruth, because I got to learn a little bit about the two people who'll be presenting today. I'll just quickly recognize other members of the committee. Ruth, Emily Jones, and Sean Morin are not here tonight, nor is Bill Rayleigh. We have Julie, she's with the Conservation Commission, Patrick with the Planning Board, Joe LaMattina, who's on the Town Council, and our guest speaker is Henry. I'll start with your introduction, Henry. Henry's an energy consultant who's been supporting Newmarket, this group, very directly, to develop the community power plan. Henry supported the founding of Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. It's a new statewide power agency that operates on a not-for-profit basis and serves member cities and towns in planning, launching, and operating community power programs. I'll just add that Henry really knows his stuff and has the rare gift of being able to articulate it and often answer a question before you even know what you're asking. So we're really lucky to have had him leading the way and here tonight to answer your questions. Ellen Reed is our chair and champion, I would say, of this committee. She's the standing member. The rest of us are new. Joe, you've been on the gang for a while. Ellen is a 13-year resident of Newmarket, and she's freshly elected to her 4th term as a representative of the New Hampshire House, and she represents Newmarket and Newfields. We're lucky to have her. I'll just add that she'll be receiving a Woman of Excellence Award in South Carolina next week for the National Foundation of Women Legislators. So, I just wanted to plug that to brag and say what a credit she is to this town and this committee in particular. So we're looking forward to hearing from you both. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And I just want to raise and lift up Peter Nelson, who's a former chair of this committee, who's in the audience tonight and he actually got us started on the path that we're currently on with community power and did some very, very intensive data work with requesting and going through Newmarket's energy usage. So with that, I think it's Henry's turn to talk, I think.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Henry Herndon. I'm representing the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. And okay, now it's on. And I have some slides, and we'll talk a little bit about what is community power and what is the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. And then really I'm looking forward to questions and discussion with the members of the audience, if there is any, or with the committee, so I enjoy some of the dialogue and the back and forth, so hopefully we'll get through the lecture slides and get to the conversation quickly. So with that, I just wanted to sort of open up with our context. We're experiencing some of the highest electricity rates ever in New Hampshire right now. We're heading into this winter. Eversource's rates have doubled from 10 cents to 22 cents, and it's largely driven by international fossil fuel markets and other international macro factors. And New Hampshire is particularly over-reliant on natural gas as an electricity generation resource. So some of the solutions we're going to be talking about are solutions where Newmarket and other communities in the state will be able to implement programs that can eventually lower those costs, lower them in the short term, and then protect against that fossil fuel volatility in the longer term by developing local resources that are not sort of at the whims of the international fossil fuel market. So next slide. Community power, this is the solution we're talking about tonight, and I'll walk through what it is and what it means. It was made possible by recent legislation in 2019 and 2021 in the New Hampshire General Court, and there's what it is it allows New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties to become the default electricity provider for their residents and businesses. Sort of three pieces of this. Step one, you have a bulk buying group. Your residents and businesses can form essentially a buying collaborative where they have an economy of scale to purchase electricity in the market and reap those benefits. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was asking if you
and
wanted me to go next.
No, you're good. And then secondarily and importantly, the utility company Eversource continues to own the grid and deliver that power and remain sort of compensated for that role that it plays and a partner to community power. This is about the energy supply, not about the distribution network and system. And then the third piece is the benefits for the residents and businesses where they can get lower rates. They can also have greater choice in terms of choosing renewable energy products or sourcing power from local generators, or really a lot of other innovations that are rapidly developing in the electricity space, from battery storage to electric vehicles and other innovations. So Newmarket is drafting a plan and preparing to have the option of doing community power, and if and when that launches, that will be an entirely voluntary program that customers could choose to opt out of. And I've got the legislation listed there. It's RSA 53E. So just some of the benefits, I've talked about these, but opportunities to lower costs, first and foremost is really the local control, allowing cities and towns to choose locally what they want to prioritize in their energy procurement. Lowering costs, we see other markets using these programs to lower costs for consumers. Sorry. Not quite. And then renewable energy, if that is a motivator for the town, I understand there is a resolution and a goal in Newmarket to have more renewable energy. This can be a mechanism to do that cost effectively at the community scale as opposed to one by one, customer by customer. And then, again, I mentioned some of the innovations where you can get into the benefits of energy storage or shifting energy usage away from high cost peak times. And various technologies and price signals that can come through these programs. We can unpack that later in the Q&A if we'd like. So part of how this is all becoming possible is last year in October, 14 cities and towns, including the town of Newmarket, came together to form a new nonprofit power agency, Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. The membership of that organization has since grown to 22 cities and towns in the state. That is, it's a community-governed nonprofit, so Newmarket has representatives on the board of directors, as do all of the other members. And currently, the 22 members represent approximately 20% of the state's population, and that is the equivalent of 119,000 electric customers and a large volume of electricity sales that, at full enrollment, will represent $150 million in annual revenues from the sale of electricity across those communities. And what is important and unique about this coalition is those revenues are controlled by the member cities and towns on a not-for-profit basis as opposed to flowing to a private or investor-owned entity. So there's good community oversight and governance of the finances and the operations of Community Power Coalition. And there are not yet programs operating, but the first wave of 10 or so communities is looking at launching energy supply in spring of this coming year and becoming the energy provider for their cities and towns. And Newmarket is on track to be a fast follower after that first wave. So this is just sort of illustrating the economy of scale of this, what happens at the town level and then what happens at the state level through this new coalition. And the red indicates the current members relative to the utility companies, so that second bar, the dotted line, is Eversource's scale without community power. And you've got the current members in the red, and then the blue represents the 35 plus cities and towns that are considering joining the coalition and launching their own programs. So this is really just to illustrate that within a few short years, community power in the coalition could become the predominant way energy is supplied in the state under this democratic, locally controlled model where you have market power for the communities. Governed by and for communities, again, just illustrating what you have on this slide is the list of all of the board directors. Each member city and town appoints a representative to the board. These include former legislators and regulators and utility executives and journalists and engineers and lawyers and all kinds of different volunteers from the community level, city managers, elected officials,
that have come together on a volunteer basis, serve on this board, and provide a breadth and depth of experience and expertise. And so there's an enormous amount of civic engagement, public service occurring to create this coalition. And just some of the takeaways. Really, community power is about empowering local leadership on energy projects and policy. So, you know, it puts cities and towns front and center in terms of determining their own energy solutions, while also empowering them with a voice at the state legislature and at the Public Utility Commission to lead on energy policy issues, and creating solutions where we can simultaneously have lower energy costs while focusing on a local energy economy and a greener energy economy. And I just sort of included a couple of slides from the public hearings that will be coming, just to sort of re-emphasize, you know, we're talking about half of your electric bill here. We're not talking about taking over the whole bill. And that's the blue energy supply portion, not the green delivery portion, which Eversource will continue to control. And on the next slide, it really shows you on an electric bill. And just if you hit it once more, I think. Yeah. So how this will change for customers is if and when Newmarket Community Power goes live, customers will be enrolled. They will receive a mailed notification that says, "Welcome to Newmarket Community Power. Here's your new electric rate compared to Eversource's. And if you want to opt out, here's the way you can opt out of this program, or choose, you know, a 100% renewable product or some of the other options." But importantly, so the bill will continue to come from Eversource. Eversource will still own and operate the grid and be compensated to be a key partner in reliability. It's just about changing the supply of that energy to that Newmarket Community Power. And just a couple of other key points, which I think I have already said, but the thing I'll just reiterate is if and when the town of Newmarket adopts its community power plan, that will authorize the town council to contract with services to run power procurement. That could be through the coalition, and there's sort of an assumption but not a commitment to take service from the coalition. But that's what the plan that is being developed by the committee. They'll have public hearings, they'll bring that to the town council. If the town council adopts that plan, they'll then have the authority to launch the program. And just reiterating our process, Newmarket helped found and joined the coalition, or CPCNH, Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, in 2021. The committee has been developing that plan, and the town council will consider that plan after public hearings to allow for Newmarket Community Power to launch as soon as 2023 or potentially in 2024. And I think that might be the end of my slides. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Are there any questions yet, just for Henry? But we'll have question time at the end as well. Okay.
Peter raised his hand.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see.
Hi, Peter Nelson. Just a question, Henry. I thought it might be good to, in your comparison of the communities across the state, I mean, you do have some competition with Good Energy and Standard Power that have similar aggregation schemes or capabilities. It might be useful when you're talking to the towns, in Newmarket included, to talk about towns that have joined those alternative programs that are similar to what Community Power does, because I think it presents a bigger picture that there is value there, and there is value in sort of the combined purchasing power when people join that type of purchasing group. So that would just be a suggestion. I think that would be interesting to see too, because it will bring, you know, there are a few communities that are doing that now, and they might have some history behind it. Not that you're privy to their exact numbers, but I think it would be useful information for people to see. And I think it's also a selling point for people to know that you're not just a one-off kind of thing, that you're competing, and you know, competition is good, right? You have people that are licking at their chops to get the same base of communities and customers that you are, and that's going to keep things competitive, I think. So that's my comment.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. There are a couple of other private broker firms that are offering this kind of a service, and there are a number of towns exploring different models in the state, and yeah, it's well worth noting.
Right, and then I guess I would just ask, maybe for the audience here and myself as well, if you can give us a quick update on where, I know you're hiring and you're looking to hire a new director and possibly other positions. Maybe you can give us a little organizational update on Community Power Coalition.
Sure. So the coalition formed in October of last year, and then this past summer it conducted a competitive solicitation process. It issued a request for proposal to hire the vendor team that will manage power procurement across all of the cities and towns. That was a very successful nationally competitive process. As a result of that, there are really three main firms that were on the cusp of executing final contracts with those firms. One is Ascend Analytics, who will be the power portfolio manager. They'll manage power procurement. They're a national firm that provides service to many utilities and community power agencies and renewable energy developers across the country, contributing really deep expertise in power procurement. They'll manage the procurement. They're also providing several $1 million in financing to finance the initial power procurement. The second firm is the retail customer service provider. That's Calpine Energy Solutions. That's the firm that will manage all the utility data. So in the background, you develop one of these programs, and the utility will share all of the customer usage data with the community power program, so that you can know how much energy you need to buy and manage all of that. So they'll also be in charge of mailing and processing all of the customer enrollment notices. So welcome to Newmarket Community Power, and then processing as folks want to come in and out of that program on a voluntary and no-cost basis. The third firm is Clean Energy New Hampshire, and they're going to do a lot of the support to cities and towns in the state to educate them about the opportunity and help them develop their programs locally. So that's all happening on the operational side within the coalition. And I forgot to mention Calpine will be providing startup funding as well, $750,000 in startup funding. Some other aspects are the coalition issued a solicitation for executive search services to find the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer. That will be a national search. There is a committee-recommended firm out of 8 competing, headhunting shops to go and find a CEO to run the coalition. So that's ongoing, and really there's sort of a lot of nitty-gritty, like in the background there's a lot of technical work that has to occur to stand up procurement over the coming months to be prepared for spring. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's great. My one other question, I know just based on my trying to keep up with what's going on, there's some mandated next steps, one of which is sort of a refresh of the data collection effort, and maybe you can just clarify what else is involved.
Yeah, good question. So there are regulatory rules. This was it took a long legislative and regulatory process to get all the pieces in place, and they're all in place as of this October. So now that those regulatory rules are in place, the committees in the towns have to take a number of steps. One is they have to register their committee with the state agency, the Public Utility Commission. They just send a letter, say we have a committee. So many of the communities have done that, and I believe Newmarket has. And then there is an initial data request that the committee sends to the utilities that says, let us know how much energy is used in the residential sector, in the commercial sector, in the municipal sector. So those, the cities and towns, and Newmarket included, are sending in those data requests. And I think that the timing is you've registered your committee, and then you've got 10 days later you got to send that request. So that's in process. And then the state will also have to approve your plan after the town approves the plan. So that takes 60 days. Once the state approves the plan, there's just some of that business process with utilities to get the necessary data and set up the systems to really operate a program. So all of that said, there's sort of where Newmarket is in the drafting phase, and they're going to have their public hearings and approve that plan, and then there's just some more work to be done to make sure all the right regulations are complied with to stand up a functional and appropriate program.
Great. One more question that just came to mind. Counties can also be joined as members. I think you have at least one Cheshire County, if I remember correctly. I'm wondering if you've also considered, I don't know if that's just, if it's the politics of how the counties are formed, but is there any consideration for having a regional planning block as well, similar to a county organization around membership?
So the legislation allows for municipal and county aggregations or jointly operated aggregations. So multiple cities and towns could come together and form their own aggregation. I don't know that the Regional Planning Commission, as is provided in the law, could necessarily be a community power program, but they could potentially provide support to cities and towns that maybe wanted to form a regional program.
Right. Okay. I think that's it for right now from me.
Good questions.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question from a citizen the other day about, so they're an existing customer of Eversource, and then we're successfully forming our own coalition and everything goes forward. Would they automatically be then enrolled, or because they're an existing customer, they have to switch?
If they are getting their energy supply from the Eversource default energy supply, they would be automatically enrolled. They would be notified, given the opportunity to opt out, but if they take no action, they would be automatically enrolled.
Okay, thank you.
And then they can leave at any time with no penalty.
Right. I think some people were thinking it was only like if you were a new customer, but not if you were an existing customer of Eversource.
This term default is important. So Newmarket Community Power will become the default provider of electricity.
And if you already have opted out, then you're still in the opted out, whatever you're going with. You won't be switched into the default because you've already opted out of the default. We do have a question.
Roger Cady. You indicated that several firms have been contacted and lined up to support this. Who is paying the cost of that?
That's a good question. So I am compensated by grant funding through the coalition, as is another consultant, and we both defer a portion of our compensation until after the initial programs launch and they start selling electricity. So in the future, out of the revenue associated with electricity sales, I will receive the final third of my compensation, and this other gentleman will receive the final 50% of his compensation. For those vendors you mentioned, Ascend, Calpine, Clean Energy New Hampshire, they are operating on 100% deferred compensation contracts. They will not be paid until and unless the coalition launches and begins selling electricity in communities, at which point in time they will be reimbursed for the costs that they expended to stand the program up. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but as I would understand your response, then this deferred expense is going to be loaded on to the early customers of the power, and so that administrative cost will be unusually high for early customers.
It's a good question, and the way this is set up and the way it will work is that cost will be spread over 5 years, and it will be spread evenly over 5 years across all of the participating cities and towns. So the first 10 will launch, and they will wear that cost on their customers through the electric rates, which are still anticipated to be lower than Eversource, but a little piece of the electric rate will pay for that deferred cost. And then as new cities and towns join in, the cost will shift down for the launching communities and should be shifted on to the newer communities so that you don't pay a penalty for going first, and it's evenly shared across all of the first 5 years of programs.
And is there, if you have a contractor arranging energy supply, I'm under the assumption that they would do that on the basis that they guarantee a certain market to the energy supplier. How does that work with a community organization? Because what happens if people decide to opt out or drop out or not go with it initially?
It's another good question. For the suppliers actually have good confidence in signing these contracts with the coalition, because if Newmarket Community Power goes live, we can expect that 5 to 10% of the population will opt out. They'll choose not to participate, and we'll build that into the assumptions in procurement. But you have a pretty good degree of certainty that you will be selling electricity to 85 to 95% of each of these communities. That's a good sized chunk of electricity sales. So there is good certainty, but there of course will be the nitty gritty of the financing and the contracting, and ensuring that the folks we're buying power from are creditworthy and good counterparties for our purchases.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
Hi, Per Lawrenson. What is the relationship between the community power and any generators and any opportunity there is to encourage generation, let's say community solar generation in the region, in this town or in the area that could be taken advantage of by the organization, by the buyers?
That's a great question, and I really should have addressed that in my slides, but thank you. I'll address it now. One of the key motivators for cities and towns is to sign power purchase agreements with developers and generators to build local generation. And we've seen that succeed in big ways in other states. So there is that opportunity, and that's really what this firm Ascend Analytics will manage, is a portfolio of contracts with different suppliers and generators, and within that you can layer in contracts to build new local renewables and storage as part of that portfolio. So already the cities and towns, many of them are contemplating sites for generation, and one example, the city of Lebanon is developing a landfill gas to electricity power plant, and they would like to contract to buy all of the electricity from that for Lebanon Community Power.
So that would be some sort of a power purchase agreement for
That's correct.
for the entire production?
Yeah, and the way the coalition is set up, these are what's called project contracts. So the city of Lebanon could sign a project contract with its landfill gas to energy power plant and buy that power. And then, Newmarket could be offered to say, hey, do you want in on this project contract? Do you want to buy some of this power? And if there's enough power, and if the price is right, and if Newmarket wants to do it, you can choose to do that as Newmarket Community Power, but you don't have to. So every individual town within the coalition can choose their own projects to participate in, and they can't force a project on another town.
Does each community participant, do they get to select their portfolio of different types of power? For instance, Eversource, I think the Eversource breakout is, I don't know, it's dozens of different sources that blend together to give you the end result rate, the aggregate rate. Is each town going to be empowered or obligated or whatever to make selections on whether they want 30% solar or wind or gas or whatever it is, or nuclear?
So at launch and at the beginning, it will be fairly uniform across the towns, and then they can sort of evolve individually as they choose. But so Newmarket's draft plan has a proposal where the default that all customers will get automatically will be 5 to 10% more renewable energy than the minimum requirement. And then the customers could choose the 50% Green Start renewable energy product or the 100% Prime renewable energy product. So there is flexibility across the towns. At launch, those sort of basic categories will be pretty similar across all the towns. And then some may start to sort of evolve that mix as as we get a little more, as we get our legs under us, essentially.
Green Start and Prime that you mentioned, can you elaborate a little bit on what those are?
Yeah, so they're not set and fixed as of yet, but it would be, so there's various renewable energy certificates, some for solar, some for just sort of catch-all renewable energy. So it would be buying more of the certificates generated from renewable energy sources. That's one part of it, but you're right that like when you really get into the details, you could have a contract for electricity with like a wind farm and purchase the renewable energy certificates, or you could buy your electricity from a gas power plant and then buy separately your renewable energy certificates to sort of meet the renewable regulations. And there is a nuanced difference there. So I can't say exactly what the portfolio product is right now. At first it will be RECs, renewable energy certificates, and then it will be over time signing contracts for new renewable generators.
Okay. Have to digest that a little bit.
Yeah,
Obviously complicated. Thank you.
lots of regulations.
Okay, Peter.
Another question, and I don't think it's, I think it's basically there's not I represent a homeowners association, a condo association, and there's a lot of condo and homeowner associations in Newmarket. So there's an opportunity there to potentially have more community type solar or microgrid type projects. But I don't think the legislation is in place to permit that now. I don't know the nuances of it, but I was just reading an interesting article about a homeowners association that would allow you to put as much solar in place as you want, but go through a single meter. So I would say one of the things that I think would be very useful in a future presentation to the town and a selling point to the town, just because we do have a density of homeowner association type opportunities, would be to find legislatures that want to bring that to the table in Concord and allow us to do that. So, you know, I'm in a very small homeowners association with 4 units, 2 of which have solar now, 2 which are considering it, but we each go through our individual meters. But, you know, if there was an opportunity to have a microgrid type setup, because we also have battery power in place too, to be able to have that type of smart grid, microgrid metering, and through a single meter, opens up a whole realm of possibilities. And I know that's out of the scope of, I think, what Community Power Coalition is doing, but I think it makes sense to be tracking that. I basically have the gut feeling that there's some pent-up demand to be able to free that type of market force. And it's not an easy thing to do, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
It is related in that community power programs will be most successful to the extent that they can create the right incentives for more local generation, more rooftop solar, create situations where customers are rewarded for generating locally and especially generating at high cost times. So that's where you get things like energy storage. If you have 100 batteries in 100 homes that put power on the grid at the right time, that can really lower everybody's costs. So these kinds of things the doors can start to open up for better net metering programs, for example, for what you're talking about in relation to community power.
But there's still some legislative things that need to happen to make that happen. Am I correct in?
I don't know specifically on the homeowners association front, but there are regulatory and legislative barriers to clean energy, and a part of what's built into the coalition is, you know, let's equip these cities and towns to have a stronger voice at the legislature to represent the customers.
And Peter, you remember when we did our Solarize campaign and listened to the different vendors, that I was a very strong advocate for extending the opportunity for solar to people who were renting and things. So it's something I'm very interested in. So why don't we talk later about what we might put in?
I think that's going to have to happen from a state house perspective.
I will say that to the extent we talk about incentivizing and stuff, that is part of what we're working on with the master energy plan, or what we've been referring to as the master energy plan. And this, our participation in Community Power Coalition is part of that as well. But that's kind of an additional piece that we can, again, you're very welcome to talk with me later and engage with the committee.
Okay, great. So again, my point there being, as part of the energy plan, I think it would also be interesting to sort of break out, if possible, the number and amount. You know, we have all the detail of residential energy consumption, but we don't break it out by single family or homeowner association, condo association. You know, you have the Rivermore condos, you have other big condo associations in town. I think, you know, at the end of the day, that's what people are going to be interested in. They're going to know, can they do things on their own to help lower their own electric costs? Right. And where is the exact return on investment for doing that? So I think the more that in the end that you can speak to that adds to the viability of the whole raison d'etre for joining Community Power Coalition.
And as I said back in the day, the reason I was, you know, thought that it was such a interesting or important thing to bring up is because that is the market that isn't at all saturated, right? Like, people who have large McMansions, if they want solar, they already can afford solar. But it's people who are renting, people who live in multifamily structures that don't already have access to that. So helping them have access to renewables is, I think, where the strength of, or the most opportunity for moving into more renewables is.
Great. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you. Anything else before we move on to specifically Newmarket's electric aggregation plan and where we are and where we hope to be in the process? Okay.
Henry, can you make a guess as to what sort of let's call it a discount might be anticipated in for the town, for the members, the individual ratepayers?
There's been studies in Massachusetts that found residential energy supply savings of 12% on average relative to Eversource's residential energy supply rate. And what I can't say what this percent discount will be. What I can say is the plan for the coalition is to set rates such that they are discounted from the utility rates and track that. And I can talk about why this is possible. So the utility is regulated and goes to market every 6 months, twice a year, on a fixed clock and buys 6 months of power at a fixed point in time. Doesn't matter what's going on in the market. Doesn't matter that Russia just invaded Ukraine. They can't change when they buy power, and for that reason they tend to, on average, have higher costs than competitive actors. So what the coalition does is this portfolio where at times it looks at the market. You know, these vendors have very sophisticated modeling and procurement strategies, and it's really a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month monitoring and then taking positions in the market with different suppliers and having that portfolio. So that's a structural advantage. That is why competitive energy suppliers can typically beat regulated utility supply rates.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so I'll just talk really briefly about what our current draft of our electric aggregation plan for Newmarket is kind of shaping up to look like, what it might contain, and where we are in the process. A lot of this may be redundant, but it'll be very quick, as opposed to Henry, who did like a lot of heavy lifting. And Henry, if there's anything I say that's incorrect, please interrupt me. So again, Henry answered this already, but why Newmarket Community Power? So you may or may not be familiar with the fact that in July of this past year, Newmarket joined 6 other municipalities in New Hampshire by committing to 100% renewable electricity for the electric grid by 2030, and for fuels for heat and transportation by 2050. This was after 4 years of my personal effort and a year and a half of effort on this committee that we were able to pass this as a town. So this is aspirational, but it is a goal that the town has officially stated. So obviously being part of this kind of co-op of towns, communities, and counties allows us to, first of all, get cheaper electric rates, especially as the cost of fossil fuels is skyrocketing, as we're all aware. And sustainability in general is in line with Newmarket specific community values. So what will Newmarket's, specifically Newmarket's community power plan look like? So we don't really know yet, and that's why we're having this, right? The wonderful thing is that CPC&H provides us incredible versatility by giving us access to all these tools. So let's say we were on our own and we said, hey, we want to do 100% renewables by 2030, but the town of Newmarket doesn't have any resources at its disposal. We would have to go through the hard work of finding firms to consult us, and how would we possibly do that? It would be extremely expensive. Taxpayers would have to burden the cost of that. So we can kind of make it after whatever image we want because we have all these wonderful expertise and resources at our disposal through CPC&H. So the plan as we currently have been drafting it, the trigger for going into a live and enacting the actual community power is at when we reach the point that we have the same or better renewable portfolio as Eversource, which of course is set at 22% by is it PUC that set that back in the day? That had an increasing percentage for the renewable portfolio, but it stopped at 22%. So they will no longer, as far as I'm aware, will be increasing that. So when we're able to offer a renewable portfolio as good or better than Eversource and a rate as cheap or better than Eversource, that's when we would launch, and we wouldn't launch before that. So that's language that's built into, so far into our draft, but is pretty typical across all the different municipalities. That's essentially where everybody's at. One of the things that we could put into our electric aggregation plan is the idea that since we do want to reach 100% renewable for the electric grid by 2030, we could increase that portfolio by about 11% a year in order to get it to 100% by 2030. It also, as was already mentioned, again, Henry kind of covered everything, gives us the ability to generate our own electricity because we have all these experts we have access to these experts who can help us if we want to build a solar field, if we want to go in with Durham and build a solar field together, if we wanted to retrofit our dam for hydroelectric, something that has been happening across the country a lot. Whether or not these projects are feasible or they'd be cost effective, we don't know, but that's what's so great about having those experts there for us. And the other thing that was just briefly touched on is the idea that we do want to pay, in our plan, want to pay special attention to net metering and make sure that even though our rates will be cheaper than Eversource, that we're still offering competitive net metering rates for customers that generate their own energy. We don't want to penalize them. We want to incentivize people to go solar. We don't want to penalize them for going solar. So, and like I said, as part of the overall master energy plan, of which this is only one part, we're trying to do more things to incentivize private generation. So this is pretty much straight out of the materials that Henry has provided. But as he said, each member, meaning Newmarket, has appointed a director and alternate to the board. Our member is Tony Weinstein, our chair of the council, and the alternate is Steve Fournier. And the town council, with the assistance of this committee, will contract for operational services, and the town council did approve that this committee, the Energy Environment Advisory Committee, also will serve as the Energy Aggregation Committee for the purposes of CPC&H. By joining the coalition, the town of Newmarket has access, the expertise, resources, and legislative advocacy of other coalition communities. So as Henry already explained, Newmarket Community Power would become the default, but customers would be able to opt out. They would have a 30-day notice, is that correct? That Newmarket Community Power is going live, and if they're already going with the default provider of Eversource, that if they do nothing, that will switch over to Newmarket Community Power. Within that, we would have the default plan, as also Henry covered, but they could also choose either a less expensive or a higher renewable energy portfolio plan. And I think it's important to lift up the idea that as fossil fuels are increasing and technology for clean energy is getting cheaper and cheaper, we've already are around the point where green energy is actually more cost effective than fossil fuel energy. And in fact, depending on the particulars, it is now cheaper from what I hear from experts, cheaper in some cases to build an entirely new green energy production facility rather than maintain an existing one. So we'd operate on competitive basis. Customers will be able to switch back to Eversource with no penalty. It'll be self-funded, so once again, who pays for it? Taxpayers will pay for it in the sense they pay for it as rate users, but taxes won't pay for it. So the town of Newmarket will not be using taxes in any way to pay for this, unless they decide that they want to hire, independently hire legal services or whatever to assist us, but that would be up to the council. In terms of CPC&H, none of that comes out of taxpayer money. It's all paid for by ratepayers. The town council, with advisory support from the Energy Aggregation Committee, that's us, our other hat, will contract for the necessary services and power supplies to implement and operate the programs at customer rates prior to program launch and continue to provide oversight thereafter. As I said, we'll get, if we launch, we'll get notice 30 days before. Customers currently on the default energy will be able to opt out. Customers already getting their power from competitive so if they've already opted out and are already going, and a lot of this is business customers because they're the ones that are usually paying attention to every cent. So a lot of businesses have opted out from Eversource and gone with a cheaper supplier. Nothing would happen to them because they're already out of the default. New utility customers will get similar opt-out notices. All Newmarket Community Power default service customers will be able to know the fixed rate at least 30 days in advance and be able to switch supplier at next meter read upon request with no penalty or exit fee. So again, this was straight out of Henry's material, but this would be, I think, yep, there we go. Would be an example of how the bill changes. And again, it's worth noting that Eversource continues to be the energy supply would come from Newmarket Community Power, but they would still own the distribution mechanism. As it says in the key point here, Eversource will continue to deliver the electricity. Town council, with advisory support from us, will be authorized to contract for the necessary professional services and power supplies to launch the program. And participation in Newmarket Community Power is completely voluntary. All right. And then the timeline. So, like we said, when Peter was chair of this committee, we started kind of the investigative, questions of, do we want to join this? What would it look like? That was back in 2020. And since then, Newmarket did join CPC&H, has named this committee as the EAC, Electric Aggregation Committee, and has tasked us with drafting the beginnings of the EAP, the Electric Aggregation Plan. I'm a little bit on these public hearings, has done everything they feel they need to do. They would eventually make the decision to hopefully enact it. And so we're looking at the timeline of this going into early summer of next year. And if approved, the town will notify Eversource and the PUC, select the provider, the customers would be notified, and then I guess there's a third public hearing, huh?
Before launch, yeah.
But right before launch, and then we would launch. So that's the overall timeline. As you can see, we're maybe not quite, but almost halfway through. And then questions. Yes.
Back up to the previous slide. Under program launch, you say the town will contract with a service provider. You mean the town council, or the energy committee?
So
And what is the contract mean if there's no, if the town is putting no money into this and has no liability?
So I'll let Henry answer it in full, but I think the short answer is the town council is the one that makes the decisions. We advise them only, but that whatever decisions they make, they're going through CPC&H to make those contracts. So.
Yeah, that's right. The town council, so when the town council adopts this plan, they're not committing to any course of action. What it will do is then they can entertain contracts with service providers through the coalition is one option, and there are essentially two contracts that the town council will have to review and execute. The first is a cost sharing agreement, which says here's how all the members of the coalition are going to share the costs fairly across all the members through the electricity rates. And then the second is a policy that governs risk management, rate setting, and financial reserves. So there's parameters around, making sure we're not taking any risks in the power market. There's parameters around how and when we're allowed to set rates, and then there's parameters on how we collect financial reserves. Because if you sign a contract with a competitive supplier, they sell you power, and then they take their 8 to 12 to 15% off the top for profit, because they're a for-profit company. For the coalition, that profit becomes financial reserves that the coalition controls on behalf of all the members. So there is revenue. It's a not-for-profit, but there's revenue that we collect to keep rates low over time. So those are the two contracts that when we get to the end of the finish line, there will be two contracts that the town council will.
But the town will bear no liabilities on any of those.
So the purpose of setting up this coalition is to have the coalition hold all the liabilities, and those liabilities are non-recourse to taxpayer general funds. So the town of Newmarket can't sign the cost sharing agreement and the rates reserves policy and then a week later walk away from the power contracts. There's like the term isn't set yet, but it's a 3 to 5 year term for those. But you're right, the liabilities are held with the coalition and they're non-recourse to the town.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Will the public hearings be broadcast or put on, YouTube or something like that?
So the question, because for the video, I'm going to repeat your question. So the question was, will the public hearings be available online? And the answer is yes. I believe everything that the town does is available. Videos of it are available at this point, including our meetings, our monthly meetings. And they will be noticed to the public, and that's a legal requirement anyway, but they'll be noticed to the public and videoed in case people can't show up in person. And should be available long after. I think we have a channel on YouTube.
Can I add, just to bolster that, the notices that Ellen mentioned would be the bare minimum. But this committee is quite invested in educating ourselves and our neighbors and the whole community. So not only would they be advertised by the bare minimum, but we would get the word out and encourage participation and questions to strengthen the effort. So. Yes, hopefully, yes, yeah, we appreciate you being here, and I know hopefully there are some people watching, and then there's an afterlife of it being recorded, so we hope it'll ripple out, but thank you for being here, and you can,
the word amongst my neighbors.
Thank you.
A recent talk that the town hosted, it was actually at the library, it was on housing, but I think there was like something like 5 times the number of people who were, 5 times the number of people who were there were actually watching online or watched it in the upcoming days online. So hopefully we have a couple dozen people watching right now. All right, Joe, I think you, oh, sorry.
To the camera?
Yeah, wave to the camera. Joe, you had something?
Yeah, I have a question, either you or Henry.
I'm sure it'll be Henry.
Okay, you both touched upon this, but you can elaborate how the program will be managed in Newmarket. Newmarket's not going to go out and hire its own individuals to manage the programs. Can you just kind of like touch on that again?
So that's the other thinking behind the design of the coalition. Instead of every small town in the state having to hire their own person who can manage community power program, you create one central entity that can service all the different members and have a high level of expertise and professionalism that's shared across all of them. So Newmarket doesn't have to hire anybody. That's all done through the coalition.
I think it's wonderful because, you know, to have this, it's really special. And I can tell you, it's being a member of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. I went out to Denver for their conference this year and was speaking with their experts from around the country about this, what we have going on in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire really is on the forefront of community power, and everybody was fascinated about what this was looking like and how it was shaping up. So it's fantastic. Like I said, if previously if Newmarket said, hey, we would really like to do 100% renewable energy, you know, the how to get there seemed insurmountable. Right? What are we going to do? Is Newmarket going to create a power company? But this is essentially like the towns in New Hampshire creating a power company with all of the abilities and expertise and professionalism that Eversource has. So, yeah.
With Eversource still controlling the delivery costs, what would keep them from hiking that price up with the loss of customer base?
It's a good question. So right now, Eversource doesn't make any money on energy supply. They used to own the power plants, and then we deregulated, and we had them sell off their power plants because we, as a state and a lot of states, decided a competitive market is a cheaper way to do that. So they don't lose any revenue when you switch to community power. Doesn't affect them financially. So they're still going to be made whole for the delivery side of things. And that's all regulated by the Public Utility Commission, and that won't change. So it won't affect the delivery side of the cost.
They're not losing anything anyway, so. Anything else?
Is there any thought to, so we're talking about Eversource or any other power company. When we're paying our rates and we're paying into that company, those funds then go back to shareholders or leave the state. Is there any thought that with this being a New Hampshire-based group, that more of the economic benefit will then accrue to the towns and communities of New Hampshire as opposed to a multi-state corporation, which, you know, it doesn't accrue to us, basically. We pay and get the power, but we don't get any benefit, really.
That's exactly right. That is the thinking of, you know, get the programs up and running, help save folks money, but then really control the revenue stream associated with that energy supply collectively and use that to build a more local energy economy and reinvest that back into the state for the communities.
So again, potentially we would see more revenue staying within the state of New Hampshire and within these communities by setting up a program like this.
Especially if you are signing contracts with local generators. And then, I mean, more so than signing contracts with local generators, there's the opportunity to improve energy efficiency programs, reduce energy usage, and these innovative customer technologies where we can all start to shift our energy usage away from high cost time, and that's creating a market for these local innovative energy companies to give customer services while lowering folks' costs. So there is like this future local energy economy that we're building towards, and it's apparent now more than ever that it's really needed in this market.
It's really great to keep the money local. Yeah.
Along that line, can you talk a little bit about Newmarket could in fact set their own rates if they decided they wanted to do that and do something with that excess revenue?
So yes, there is this reserve fund. The coalition will collect a reserve fund on behalf of all of the members, and there's sort of a minimum that the coalition needs to make sure everybody's rates stay low. over time, not on day one, but 12 months, 18 months, however long into it, the coalition has sufficient reserves, it's getting its credit rating, it's up and running, it's financially stable. Newmarket could potentially say, you know, maybe the coalition can get us 15 cents relative to Eversource's 18 cents. But we're going to decide to charge 16 cents instead to collect an extra penny a kilowatt hour into our own Newmarket reserve fund because we want to do special projects with that. That is a potential opportunity, not on day one, but over the course of time. There's a trade-off between what is your electric rate, how much you're collecting in your financial reserves, and these things are balanced, and there is local control within the different communities.
I just love all the options. Like, this is such a versatile thing. We have so many options available to us. Anything else? Okay, well, I will unceremoniously end this public forum. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to everybody at home who's watching.